Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have someone really special, one of my favorite people, Rami Desai ji, who will tell us. Kyunki, namaskar, thank you. The narrative is that bhai, China is winning everywhere. Rami Desai ji, just like me, is thinking a little different. She has put out an article saying, bhai, it's not a cakewalk for China, especially in a country which is something that we don't talk about, Myanmar. Let's try and find out. जो rollback that we are talking about from China, from Pakistan, and from Bangladesh, is it going to happen in Myanmar as well? Namaskar ji, once again, thank you so much for joining in.
Namaskar, Aadi. Only you can bring me out on a talk at 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon on Janmashtami.
Thank you. But आप मुझे ये बताओ, what is the premise of what you've written? I mean, what did you notice that kind of said, yeah, something is wrong?
Look, Aadi, we tend to look at things very piecemeal. We do not follow it on a day-to-day basis. This is where I find a lot of people's analysis not accurate. We also tend to only see it in binaries. Wherein, if you're studying a subject, you have to look at all the factors that influence it. You have to look at history. You have to look at archives. You have to look at current news, and then not just from one source. You have to look at it from multiple sources. So that you know what the biases are. And my and like I said, my understanding of the situation in Myanmar, and of course it can be very different for different people, is that it's a very complex country, like all these areas are, because they have so many different ethnicities, they have so many different religions, they have so many different um, autonomous identities, that all of them, the politics becomes very complex to follow. Now, for China, Myanmar, everybody's been thinking is a cakewalk because they feel that, oh, it's right next door. They're giving Myanmar money. There's the Shapshuk port, the their ambitions on the gas and oil pipelines, making Yunnan the springboard to Southeast Asia, so on and so forth. But what people don't take into consideration is that they're not very liked on ground, number one. So it's not just the Bamars, there are many other groups that really don't like the Chinese there because it had become so visible. The Chinese influence on Myanmar, with the shopkeepers, with retail, with businesses, trade, the northern region where you have Han ethnicity Myanmaris running gambling centers and cybercrime units, that it had started becoming very difficult for people in Myanmar to digest. So, number one, they don't like the Chinese as much as we think that they would, and public perception and popular notions make a difference when you're dealing with two countries. Number two, the present Senior General Heng, who is the chairman of the SAC, um, has not been accepted by China. So they've never ever openly turned around and said, yeah, he's the leader of the country, or so on and so forth. I'm not saying that they need to accept him, but I'm saying that apart from the fact that they haven't, they have a contentious history. Senior General Heng and the Chinese have never liked each other. He is very, very suspicious of the Chinese, and the Chinese are very, very suspicious of him. They're frustrated with him. They're saying that he cannot handle what's happening in Myanmar. He cannot handle the turmoil that's happening, which is risking their investments. So there is, again, apart from people to people suspicions, there's also this suspicion within governments and leaderships that makes things even more difficult. Number three, we all have spoken about Operation 1027, between MNDA, Tang, and Arakan. Now that we know, last time also when we spoke, we discussed the fact that they're getting a lot of support from China because the MNDA chief was ousted Now hear this. This is quite complex. So MNDA Chief Peng was ousted by Senior General Heng previously. And for the last, I think, 15, 20 years, he was living in China because he was not allowed to come back because he was ousted by the same guy. So the Chinese activated MNDA. He came back from China. Peng came back from China to Myanmar. And this has become very problematic for the junta because, like I said, Senior General Heng was the one who had ousted him earlier on,
Hmm.
MND chief. So this was like a bit of a, I think, it's been taken personally, and therefore the counterattacks on all these insurgent groups, ethnic armed organizations, militias, whatever you want to call them. But the other thing is that China is not being able to control them because July, May, there's been a second Operation 1027. So the first Operation 1027 happened last year in October. And after that, China brokered the ceasefire because they said, okay, we've proved our point. We've pushed the junta to shut down the cybercrime units. Now, you control your autonomous districts or your, areas or whatever you have control over. But don't continue the fight because it's going to have an impact on our investments in Myanmar. Until unless there is some amount of peace and political stability, they cannot construct, they cannot send their people on ground. Though the Chinese have cut a deal near Sharpshu, I think, yeah, they've cut a deal where 500 Chinese workers have landed. But those deals can, they're not like bulletproof, right? They can change all the time. So basically, the Chinese wanted some amount of stability. So now it seems that the Chinese have no control over the same operations that they had activated last year and the same militias that they had activated last year. So there are many reasons like this, and there are more, including Russia now coming into Myanmar. So my conclusion of that article was that this is not going to be a walkover. We are giving too much of importance, or we blindly saying, oh, China is going to take over Myanmar. Sure, they have an influence. Sure, we have an influence. Sure, the US has an influence. Sure, Thailand has an influence. Sure, Russia is going to have an influence, right? But that doesn't mean that they're going to control all of China. That doesn't mean that there can't be any other players in Myanmar. So that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be any other players in Myanmar, or that China is going to entirely control Myanmar. So we have to look at things in perspective.
Hmm. That's an interesting nazariya. That's the right word for it. Because, see, when you look at what's happening in Myanmar today, a large part of Chinese interest was in the Bay of Bengal in Myanmar, right? That pipeline which goes from the Kyokfu to through to from the southern Myanmar into Keramek, Kunming, and all that stuff. Wahan jati. Yunnan, actually, it goes into.
Mhm.
Now, the current scenario is that the army is, of course, in control of that. Some part of that region, Arakan is in control of some part of that region. The Chins are in control. Idhar udhar काफी कुछ है उधर पे. So the battle lines have not fully been drawn. वहां पर गड़बड़ है अभी भी. In the north, the battle lines are pretty much drawn, and the Shagang, these guys are kind of okay. They know where to this thing. Even if the southern part, the bottom line, the battle lines do get drawn, the battle goes on, and let's say the junta or the janta, as I like to call them, is moved off. That still doesn't bring a resolution to the problem in Myanmar. How long will you be able to bribe your way through? Is what the Chinese have been doing in that area. So how long do you think that the Chinese can hold this uh, you know underhanded control within Myanmar?
See, I don't think this ever ends anywhere, right? There'll
Hmm.
always be some control game that's happening. It's not going to abruptly end.
Hmm.
This is one of the most important places for China to be, as it is
Hmm.
for many other countries to be in. Uh, Russia has just taken the Dawei port, which is on the northeastern side near Thailand. They are planning a deep sea port there.
Yeah.
China has done a feasibility study in that area on Dawei and then chosen Sharpshu instead. So what's going to happen is like this: there are going to be multiple players that are going to come in. I don't think that China is going to disappear. No. I don't think that Myanmar situation is going to be any better than chaos. Whether the juntas promise that there'll be a election next year. They're preparing for a census in October. However, they've made these promises before. But honestly, elections in situations like this doesn't guarantee anything. Who are we trying to fool that suddenly democracy will come in? Of course, it's great. There should be democracy, but is it really going to be democracy when now all the groups have certain amount of they have weapons, they have money, they're being funded, they have uh, certain identity politics. They're also now, they the way I look at it is the kind of illegal stuff that is happening there gets vested interest so much of money that
Mm.
why would they want to fall under some law and order? Now we've discussed this before, Papi and Saigang and all. They say that it's all shifted from Afghanistan to Myanmar. I don't say this, UNODC says this. 90% of the production is in Myanmar now of Papi. Except they have such great machinery and they have such great fertilizers and irrigation methods that they are growing like some greatly high quality poppy now that is selling. The yield has become 4 times the amount, and now the cost has become, I don't know how much more, another 4 times the amount, because it's just like this great stuff, this machinery they have, and it's fully mechanized, and know. So and now when they're making money like this, what are the crop? They're going to grow rice. They're going to grow paddy. So I don't think I don't think that's realistic to think about it like that. So the groups that are controlling these areas and who are making money out of these areas have now tasted blood, so as
Mm.
to say. They've tasted a certain independence, autonomy. They were always autonomous to a certain degree, but now I'm sure they like to run this stuff on their own. Now, if you look at this northern region also, and the kind of mining that is happening there, the kind of critical earth material, the 90% goes from is mined in Myanmar, 70% I think is refined in China, and then out of that 70%, you know, most of it goes to the US for their green transition, to use in, let's say, EV cars or things like that. So uh, there's a size, there's a, maps have shown us there's the size of Singapore in northern Myanmar that has been mined to such a degree that experts assess that another 20 years nothing can be grown there. The water is poisonous. You can't have a bath there. You can't use that. Forget drinking. You can't even have a bath there because people are getting serious diseases. The soil, because leaching karte hain,
Mm.
so as वो leaching में, the soil and all of this becomes untillable, and there's no method to it, or it's rampant just mining. So where will what law and order can come in and replace all of this? Cyber crime hai, you have gambling. These are big gambling hubs. Okay, China wanted the junta to close a few. They allege that they also have a stakeholding in it. That's why they're letting it run. ठीक है, बंद कर देंगे 3-4. There's so much of money in it that it just keeps regenerating. So yeah, so I think the chaos is here to stay. We'll have to, as India, we'll have to manage it, and we'll have to manage it smartly. We'll also have to do our deal cutting, and I don't think that we're not doing it. We're very smart like that in terms of. I think our Twitterati get it a bit wrong because they're not really experts on anything except on commentary and opinion. So,
बहुत जूते पड़ेंगे इसमें.
my God, yeah, why do I say this stuff?
But you're right. You're right. I mean, there is, you're absolutely right.
What
There's no depth
they,
of detail.
what,
There is no
huh?
depth of detail. There is no
No,
depth of
they're
detail.
studying something. They're studying something, or they're working somewhere, or there's some professions in something, and they're talking about something completely laterally, like different. So
No, that's
it's so
fine. People like me are not from the professional of
if we
this
could do
thing. But
this 24/7 now. So
if I
let's
speak about something, I will read, I will research, I will dig,
yeah,
look at all the sides, and then say
yeah, but what is your expertise? Your expertise is defense, security, areas
geopolitics.
like this, geopolitics, right? So areas like this. Now, areas like this, it's a specific area, so therefore you can cover it. What I am talking about is the Twitterati that's commenting on
That's what.
everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, to Ambani's wedding, to Myanmar, to I don't know, North Korea, whatever they feel like.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean,
I'm
some
just
people
saying
turn
that,
around. The same Twitterati today was saying कि मोदी को यूक्रेन नहीं जाना चाहिए था, वहां पर नाक कटा क्या है?
मतलब
Hey,
advice तो है ना free में ले लो इस
हाँ,
देश में,
that's
that's the only thing we're going to get free. No, his advice. I mean, does he need your advice? He's gone to Ukraine. If he's taken that risk to go there, it is a very, very important move. We've always said this, even when Israel Hamas happened, Russia Ukraine happened, that India, instead of China, could be a major stakeholder in becoming a mediator. If we want to be world players, if we want to be on the global stage, if we want to be taken seriously, then these are the areas that we will have to work on.
yep.
Up, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to Ukraine. And यहाँ बैठ के कह रहे हैं दाग कटवा दी मतलब बात ही कुछ और है.
Anyways, so yeah, you're right. I mean, see the point which is there is कि जो म्यांमार का एक perspective है, the perspective which is in the public domain is misunderstood, right? People don't know that country has been in turmoil ever since it was made Myanmar or Burma or whatever it is. Nobody agrees with anybody there. Every 5 miles they think they're a different country and they want to declare independence and live their own life and this and that, and that's the reality of that place. I Over the past some time I've actually read quite a bit about it. There are two towns close to the Indian border. Both of them consider themselves as poles apart, right? It's opposite More. I'm forgetting the names now, but they are like, I mean, they have their own flags.
Yeah, they've always had this separate identity issue, and that's why their constitution allowed for these regions to have certain amount of autonomy.
Mm,
However, even when Aung San Suu Kyi came in, and again, if you're hating democracy, then this was a great case study. When she came in, um, that kind of autonomy, what they had promised was not given.
true.
So even their constitution and the way they kind of apply it or implement it is not the way it should be. It's not 100% proof. Also, let me also bring your attention to when she was in power,
Mm,
before she was elected, 6 months before she was elected. I think this must have been for the first time, if I'm not mistaken, in 20 years. That, yeah, I think so. She was invited to China, and the Chinese premier came to Myanmar, if I'm not mistaken. So, just saying that she had certain proximities till the Rohingya situation happened,
mm.
you know, and she was close to the US also. Then the Rohingya situation happened. She became closer to China because US kind of sidelined her. So, is it good for us? Do you think that elections will solve our problem? I would not bet on it. It's happened previously where we've been let down. Um, Again, not saying that elections shouldn't happen. Of course, they should. Democracy should be there. But what are our expectations is what we need to recalibrate.
Hmm. But what is it that you're looking at right now? I mean, as a situation in the country, what do you think is going to open out going forward in the future? Before I come to a little more specific about China,
Hmm.
because China has its own problems. But how do you think Myanmar will span out in the next some time? The junta doesn't have much forces left. They don't have much ammunition left. They've been scraping the literally the bottom of the barrel right now. They talk about launching a whole new offensive and this and that. दम नहीं है अभी उनके अंदर. Plus recruitment जो उनकी होती थी used to be from the north mostly, right? A lot of their soldiers and stuff like that were from the north and the central part of Myanmar. North is gone. I wonder how they are recruiting their soldiers anymore and stuff. So they won't have the capacity going forward. They're also getting surrounded at the end of it. The north is cut off. South may towards India, Arakan and all these guys are sitting in. They're slowly getting cut off.
Like
How
I
long do you
said,
think?
see, like I said, this is going to be in a state of chaos. I
Hmm.
don't think there's going to be any easy answers to this. And
Okay.
sometimes this is exactly what happens, Adi, that, you know, um, things kind of stay unstable and then people forget about it. What do you think has happened in Africa? There's
Hmm.
some 52 coups that have happened in, recent times. Do we even talk about it? No. But one time Africa was really, a central point to people's
Yeah. Yeah.
studies on geopolitics. When we talk about blood diamonds and we talk about, movies were made on it and, the kind of mining trade that was being done there, militias controlling it. It was all about Africa. Nobody ever thought about Myanmar. Now, attention for people like us is shifting. Mine has always been in this region, but, Indian observers is shifting to Myanmar. But the thing is, this stuff is still going on in Africa. So my point is that, sometimes situations are such that they stay in a certain amount of chaos. And like I said, China, we as observers shouldn't give too much of credit to China. China, like I said, has refrained from recognizing General Min Aung. That indicates a mistrust between the two countries. Now, this is something that has happened before as well, when President Thein Sein had decided to open up Myanmar to the world for the first time. That time, China got very nervous, antsy, because they didn't know what their reliance towards the West would be. Even now, we've spoken about it, that the US has a lot of stakeholding in support of NUG.
Hmm.
Um, so if NUG was to come in, the US stakeholding would still be there, and China would still be getting nervous. So it would be a chaotic situation. So I think that's how it's going to stay on. It's going to remain chaotic. Either way, whether the US is there or whether China is there, is either way all the same to us in a way, because their their way of movement is to supply arms, to supply money, to put sanctions. Fortunately, the Burma 2020 sanctions and the 21 sanctions were not a game changer. Because what do sanctions finally do? Sanctions only impact the common man on ground,
Common man.
make the impoverished poorer. They don't ever create political change. Anybody who thinks, oh, sanction daldo is a lazy way of, trying to prove your point. So,
Yeah.
it doesn't. So, seeing that, the EU also, the sanctions that EU put, it didn't put in trade and manufacturing. They put some other, like, very benign sort of sanctions, because now people have started becoming critical of sanctions as well.
Yeah.
So look, the fact is that, yeah, China has a stakeholding, India has a stakeholding, um, US has a stakeholding, and now with Russia coming in, if Dawe really takes off, Russia will have a stakeholding.
Mhm.
This is the Great Game East.
We see the same situation happening in Pakistan.
पाकिस्तान तो आप छोड़ो ही उसकी बात. I
No,
don't
it's the
know.
same. It's the identical thing which is happening in Pakistan. You've got the Chinese which are on the way out. You've got the Americans which are coming in. You've got the Russians will have an interest in that area because ISKP origins there, and then you've got yours truly also sitting there. It's the same thing over in Myanmar as well.
सब जगह होता है. Afghanistan, you
Yeah,
know, it was the same thing.
Afghanistan kind of has been left to its own devices. तो जो करना है कर, ये पैसे पकड़, किसी को तंग मत करियो बस. Just don't do anything.
Yeah,
But
hijab the country as much as you want. Just don't
yeah,
bother. No, so
the
see, this is what happens. This is not war.
yeah,
This
that's
is not. This is geopolitics,
yeah,
and the country that moves faster,
faster.
swifter, smarter, um, gets headway.
May
Now,
not be
like you,
faster, but smarter. Yeah, obviously.
yeah, but sometimes things can be game changers. So yeah, so this is more about how we are going to play our game, how geopolitics is going to change over a period of time. We don't know what's going to happen. Is there a great leader that's going to emerge? Right now, we don't know if NUG takes over, who's going to be the leadership, right? So, is there going to be a great leader? Is there going to be an uninspirational leader? Is there going to be, is NUG going to be able to control all these rebel factions that they've encouraged so much? What is going to happen of the Rohingyas? When NUG comes in. This was also a question for the junta recently because the junta was conscripting soldiers from Arsa. Um, so I think that they were doing really for their own benefit. But they used groups like this are used. So what is going to happen? And then if we widen our scope a little bit and look at it in terms of what is going to happen in Bangladesh as well. That also, Aadi, has Tamil border, has Cox's Bazar. You have the Rohingya sitting there. I've always thought that the amount of people that there are so many. Now that US has come into Bangladesh, the chances are that there is over a period of time going to be encouragement for the Rohingyas to ask for territory.
And what do you think that'll be?
Territory. It could be exactly where they're sitting. See, who has made the Rohingya issue so big? It's the West.
The CIA.
Correct.
It
Why
was.
not a group?
It,
Why do you
it,
not have Hindus in Bangladesh, Pakistan, or wherever?
it was
I'm
basically to do the same thing that they did to Europe. Basically, infiltrate a lot of these guys into it to ruin the country. It was supposed to be done to us and the region. It didn't really span out that way, but
always done this, right? They've
yeah.
always created groups that later they can't handle. But the
Hmm.
thing is that Rohingyas has become such a movement for the woke left that anybody who doesn't even know where Rohingyas are, most of the people on ground, common kids won't even know where they are based out of or where they originate out of. Will think of this as something to support. It's like the Palestinian movement. So I have a feeling with the West or US interference in Bangladesh, clear signs of CIA operations. We don't need to look any further than even statements that Sheikh Hasina has given, or even, and with I say this with all due respect, even the allegations that the list of the interim government in Bangladesh has come from the US, right? Uh, there's no saying what shape this will take. And
Hmm.
my fear is that with this growing interference, there is going to be growing legitimacy, and that growing legitimacy is going to turn into a territorial demand. That could become, and I'm not saying it's going to happen today, it's going to happen tomorrow, but how I look at it, that's where it's going.
That's very interesting because I've always wondered what the solution of this thing is. And yesterday, as a matter of fact, now that you bring this up, let me just say this. Yesterday, the US promised action and support for the Rohingya groups. Because yesterday was yesterday 25th of August was the time when that whole pogrom took place in Myanmar. So yesterday, on the same day, US has put out a thing ki, bhai, we will support the Rohingya groups as much as we can and this and that. And in their so-called detention camps, they did a
But they
protest
just
yesterday.
yeah, but if this is the kind of sympathy that they have,
Take them home.
so take them home. I mean,
नहीं,
I don't know. Like,
वो थोड़ी करेंगे यार, वो थोड़ी करेंगे.
I just don't understand. I just don't understand why there would be so much of interest, particularly for this group.
You don't you know as a leftist you only talk, you don't kind of walk your talk.
Correct. You don't want to be in that position. Huh? A leftist will, lefty doesn't ever want to go to, I don't know, doesn't want to go to like China, immigrate to China, immigrate to Cuba. They want to immigrate to like America. So they don't want to walk the talk.
They want
But
to go to America, they want to go to America.
yeah, but here's the thing, uh, for us, it's particularly dangerous because we know that
It's our region.
it's our region. We know that the Rohingyas were raised as a group by the ISI to attack during independence to attack India. I've quoted this in an article of mine on Arsa, and the first IB chief writing a letter to Sardar Patel, saying that, and that time they used to be called Arkans, uh, the Rohingyas. So he said, they're trained, and there are very strong indications that they're waiting for a go ahead to attack Tripura. Tripura, is what
Border.
what yeah, what was of great interest to them. So and they're sitting on the borders just waiting. So we know that there is a historical background to this. Even what was that guy's name, that bomb maker Tunda,
Hmm.
uh, LET ka tha, Lakshya Taiva ka tha, Tunda. When Tunda was caught, he said that he was teaching Rohingyas how to make bombs with the
Yeah.
promise that they would be used on India. We know the Kalmex massacre. We know what happened there. Hindus were targeted, and these were women and children. There were mass burial grounds that were found. So there's no doubt that this is difficult for us. So clearly, the West is not thinking about us when it's making these moves.
Because see, I can understand if I was an American, I would say, hi, yaar, what we are doing is correct because you're getting the Chinese out of the way in Southeast Asia. And if tomorrow you need to fight a battle with China, you need to know that you're not going to get bajaued in the back, right? Now, a lot of people will say, yaar, what are we doing and all that? We are nowhere in the picture because we're not there yet. We're a good big power. We can actually fight our battles and stuff, but fighting someone else's battle with a great big superpower like US, not that easy. I mean, it's what it is. We need to accept it. Now, coming. I want to ask you a couple of specifics about Myanmar. Is one, we are also hearing people's groups being formed there. There are 2 3 groups that have come up. One is this students group, which is becoming a little, a little weird. It's happening everywhere. So we've heard that. We've heard of a religious group coming up, a religious Buddhist group coming up. Now, this is very interesting to me because Buddhists have never stood up except in Sri Lanka. I guess nobody in 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 the northeast of India or the north of India has actually done something. How do you see these groups coming out, and what do you think going forward would be their outlook toward the situation? Would they want a unified Myanmar? Would they want a divided Myanmar? What is it that these so-called civil society groups are coming up with?
See, civil society groups are usually to pressure. We saw this in Bangladesh also. To
Yeah.
pressure some amount of change. Um, yes, some groups are fairly organic in nature, wherein they come up as student groups, and because obviously unemployment is high and so on and so forth. Some are not organic, and that's just going to add to the confusion. Nothing's going to happen, Addy. Uh, Eventually, this is my personal opinion, is that most of these protests, which seemingly are genuine at the outset, become political. And once they become political, it has a lot of vested interests that get involved.
Hmm.
Uh, they're not going to be so interested in anything except at this point, because there's this focus on the elections, to get the census done and then the elections. Um, I don't think anybody's thinking about what's going to happen post elections. Also, you see, to do the census is also going to be problematic because, again, there isn't a lot of control on ground. So, how are you going to do the census? Okay, chalo, kar liya tumne census. You know, to have free and fair elections is again going to be a difficult task.
Yeah.
So either way, the prognosis is not very good. And this is why sometimes when you talk about giving a lot of autonomy to groups, it becomes difficult because over a period of time, autonomy changes into, or semi-autonomy changes into, some amount of self-identity assertion. Which is, we're different to you, so we have nothing in common. Our laws should be different, so on and so forth. So that makes it very difficult to keep a biggish country like Myanmar together. And you see, because also of the economic downturn, see, we have to accept the fact that FDI is highest from Singapore and China. So because of the kind of shambles that the economy is in, they will be hell bent on taking aid, getting weapons from other countries. Now, which country can play a bigger game? China right now is giving. You'll have to wait and see.
If you look at the example of Bangladesh, post a so-called revolution, one thing that happens is people want to turn out the most corrupt guys and throw them out and stuff like that. That to me would be I mean, your article kind of refers to it, and you say
Yeah.
that if there is a revolution, Chinese will be out because you know
Matlab,
that's how it is.
we can't be so sure that there won't be this thing, because there is this growing discontent against the Chinese,
Yeah,
and that it's nothing new. It's been there before. There
yeah,
was a word called "pok for,"
yeah. Heard
right?
about this.
Meant like a fraternal
Yeah.
brotherhood between
Mm.
the Chinese and the Myanmaris, and yeah, it was, that terminology was given to forge stronger bonds, to
Guys
show
and
the
all that. Yeah.
yeah, but
Brotherhood. Yeah.
yeah, and it was fraternal brotherhood, so a close relationship. But that doesn't really stand true. It's nice, it sounds great or whatever, but is that the case on ground? No, it isn't. So there have been lots of concerns, and uske upar, there are also environmental groups there that have their own concerns. Like I mentioned the mining earlier on. So mining is not just problematic for the average civilian or people who are living in these regions where this kind of illegal critical rare earth minerals are being mined. It is also it's a contentious issue for environmentalists, not just in Myanmar, but across the world. So Associated Press had done a article with I forget the NGO. There's an NGO on ground in Myanmar, but that article is out there in AP. They've done a really good article, and it was called the Sacrifice Zone. Because they said that all of Myanmar is just being sacrificed for the West's ambition to have a green transition. So, there are lots, and like I explained to you, that West ka ambition on green transition hai, but where does the refining happen? It happens in China.
Hmm.
Who does the mining? The Chinese do the mining. So it's almost like the Americans are getting the Chinese to do their dirty
Out of
work.
sight, out of mind. Yeah.
Yeah, हम खरीद लेंगे तुम्हारे से refined product. हम अगर ये सब dirty work तुम करके दो. Also, you see what's also happening is that there is other mining also, rubies and things like that, even if it's not heavy rare earth elements, there are other minerals, very important critical minerals that are being mined, not just towards that side, but, you know,
This said
um,
also.
yeah, this side also, So it's going to impact Myanmar as a whole. And that's very concerning for the Myanmaris. And I'm sure that would be very concerning for, young people as well. These are
Hmm.
beautiful towns, Aadi. The Lashu and all, which now has been taken in Shan State, which has been taken by the Three Brother Alliance, I believe. Um, these were places where 50 years ago, 80 years ago, these were places where people would go for a holiday. These were beautiful, scenic sort of
Hmm.
areas. Now, with that kind of mining and that kind of, then people change on ground. It's not just about mining, but like,
And
you see a demographic
ancillary,
change.
ancillary industry and this and that and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so it ruins it. So all of this is going to have an impact. So I'm just saying that, we were looking at China for a while from the lens of cybercrime and gambling rackets, but now I think the problem for China is that Tatmadaw has not been able to stabilize Myanmar nor consolidate its power effectively. And that has really jeopardized China's infrastructural investments. China Myanmar economic corridor is not just about the Sharpshoot deep sea port, but it's also about the oil and gas pipelines, and this is just going to be a really, really bad
That situation.
situation. And you see, Sharpshoot deep sea port,
Mm.
Aadi, is let's say if they it's their alternative to the Strait of Malacca,
Yep.
right? And that's the actually is here, is the Strait of Malacca. So if they can't kind of like really get this going, the dominance that they are looking for will be minimized. So that's leading to their frustration to a great extent.
I don't think somewhere down the line, I have my doubts with regards to this whole Chinese model of kind of work and stuff like that. And I think that what they're facing in these countries is something that they will face everywhere,
Yeah,
because it's not a construction model, it's not a developmental model, it's a fleecing model, and that damn thing will get exposed one way or the other. It'll just come out. It's not something that is going to just stay inside for a long time.
you
uh
know, all these things that you're seeing, like I said, in the eastern side, on the Greater Mekong region, the Dawei port, um, that's also deep sea port. So
yeah.
already China is seeing it as, oh, it's undermining the importance of the Sharpshoot deep sea port, right? Now, what does that benefit? That benefits India, right? Because if Russia starts investing there and comes up with its own deep sea port, then you have, so as to say, an ally there.
What will a country like that do with such, I mean, with so many ports? क्या है? It's like Pakistan, कराची भी है, ये भी है, ग्वादर भी। अबे करेगा क्या? बनाता क्या है भाई तू?
Yeah, but I think for China, though, it's strategic.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
I
I
think
mean, I'm
just
just
for,
on a
huh,
lighter vein. On a
yeah, yeah.
lighter vein, when you invest that much in a country which has no output, which has no input, which has no nothing, you're basically in a point of time, written the check off of the country, and it's bound to kind of doomed to fail after that. So that's the main thing. Lastly, I want to ask you another small point. The Chinese internal politic at the moment is not something which is very, very good. They've got problems within China and this and that. Uh, and we've seen that the Chinese have been rolling back from various different places. One of the biggest, I think it started with the Ukraine war. When the Ukraine war started, his BRI literally went out of the window. There was a road going through Ukraine. He had 1/6 of the arable land in Ukraine. That's all gone. It's finished. It's all over. I think that was the point where it started. And then you see step by step by step their BRI and their OBOR, or whatever you want to say it. It's been rolling back. It's been rolling back. And we see that in Pakistan, Bangladesh. We see that in many countries in Africa and stuff like that. The fear is that Myanmar is a place where Chinese may be able to show their superiority. The rest of the people, they'll get their backsides handed back to them. Do you think that the Chinese will enter into a misadventure to kind of showcase and say, listen, enough, I've taken enough, here is where I put my foot down? That's my biggest fear about Myanmar.
See, the thing about the Chinese is wherever you look, they're able to somehow please the leadership, but
Yeah.
never the people on ground.
Hmm.
You
Because they
know,
think it's a single man. Nah? They don't have the concept of people.
they don't have the concept of people. So, like Senior General Hing also, he's made statements. He's made statements accusing foreign countries backing EOs with weapons and not humanitarian aid. So basically, he was indicating towards China and the US that you guys are giving all these ethnic armed organizations weapons. You know, Instead, why don't you just give humanitarian aid? You know, which you haven't given. Of course, US has, but China hasn't. So see, this kind of friction is happening. And uh, international crisis group, the head who looks at Myanmar, um, made a very pertinent point. He said, there's a very deep anti-Chinese sentiment settling in Myanmar, and this is particularly in the military. uh, as I've already mentioned, General Heng is known to be suspicious of China. He's anti-Chinese to a certain extent. Um, so I don't think. like he said, that I don't really think that China cares whether it's a military regime or any other type of regime. All it cares about is about its investments. But what
Yeah.
China does not understand is, yeah, sure, regimes will come, regimes will go. You'll decide to recognize them, not recognize them, so on and so forth. But until and unless you have goodwill on ground, it is
It'll
not
not
that.
work.
Until and unless you have military also on your side. And the reason for this is that a lot of ethnic armed organizations that we are seeing, or militias, like I said, whatever you want to call them, in Myanmar, who've been part of the Three Brotherhood Alliance, who've been part of, all the other operations that have taken place. The only counter that is there to them is the junta. There isn't anybody else. Now,
Yeah.
whoever you support is a different thing, but who is the counter to the ethnic armed organizations? The junta. And do you think the EAOs are just going to disappear? They were there before this coup and they will remain. You've had the Arakan Army, you've had MNDA, you've had Tang National Army, you've had all these people. You've had CNA, CNF. Do you think they're going to go anywhere? They're
Oh,
not. So they're going to stay there. So who are you going to use to counter them? You will have to have goodwill on the ground. You will have to have goodwill in the military, which China does not have. Of course, China will continue in whatever manner possible to safeguard its geostrategic investments in Myanmar. But ideally, China would want the Tatmadaw to control Myanmar. But at the same time, and this is very typical of them, and typical of big powers, that they want the Tatmadaw to control Myanmar, but at the same time, they want the Tatmadaw to accommodate Beijing's involvement in their internal affairs also. अब ये कैसे होएगा? So for example, an example for so an example for this is Operation 1027. अब तुम्हें launch भी करना है, फिर तुम्हें you want to broker a ceasefire also, then you want to say अच्छा अब मत second operation मत launch करो, फिर तुम्हारा सुनते नहीं है. So it doesn't work like this. So as much as we'd like to believe, oh, China has all its strategies in line, and things like that, it doesn't.
I don't buy
And
that.
yeah, these are, like I said at the outset, that these are complex areas. Nobody has their strategies dead on. So for
Yep.
us to give this much of credit to China is actually, in my opinion, fear mongering. Somebody, when I put this article out, had also said no, but China is going to involve themselves in, um, the northeast.
We should
And
send
as of
samosas and a red carpet.
what?
We should send samosas and a red carpet because that will be the gravest mistake that the Chinese would make.
Correct. But you see that all stuff nobody is interested in. But my, like, people don't want to look at it in that way. But my problem here is that you know it that involvement. Yeah, sure. When NACN happened and when they needed their training, yeah, sure, they walked via the Yunnan region and got training in China, and weapons came from there. But it's not as if China came into the northeast and was sitting there. So we have to think about what we are saying and what we are indicating. And sometimes the involvement can be by the way sort of involvement. Like they're supporting the EOs, and the EOs are selling their weapons, and they're having an impact on the Northeast. So problematic here. It's problematic for um, the Chinese as it is for any other country, and as it is for Myanmar itself.
Hmm. Hmm. I must say, Ramiji, I must tell you that there's a very practical analysis, and that's what we need to get into. Uh, Analysis have today become very binary. It's either a loss or a win. It's not that. In especially in countries, it's never a loss or a win. You will win some, you will lose some, you will um, get into trouble sometimes, and that's how it is. Everybody thought that Bangladesh was a stable partner of India, and you look where it went. Everybody thought that Sri Lanka would never improve. Look where it is, and everybody thought, look, Myanmar, oh, ye wo, and all that stuff. But the guy's back, and he's saying, "Bhai, maaf kar do yaar, galti ho gayi." I didn't realize how bad governance is. Today, he doesn't have a dollar left to his name. I mean, it's literally that bad. So It's only time that will actually tell. One more thing I actually observed from what you said is that the Chinese are today reevaluating what they're doing in Myanmar, and that's something that one can see because previously they had a very outwardly positive sort of a narrative going on Myanmar in their strategic analysis and all that. Today they just don't talk about it. That just tells me that they are resetting their strategy and they just don't know what to do about it. And that's been the case for a while now.
Yeah, like they also know that it's not going to be easy. We're not going to be able to control. 1027 was perhaps the most successful interference, in terms of what's happening of recent times. But
I'll
after
take that.
that,
But those three states told the Chinese to leave after they established themselves. They said, okay, bye bye, thank you, out.
yeah, they've launched. See, the launch of the second operation clearly tells you that they're not in control of Beijing.
Yep.
The other big move that they made was when, for this gas oil pipelines, they sent the construction workers. So that time they had to cut a deal with Hinda, they had to cut a deal with Arakan, and they did that effectively and managed to get 500 of their workers on ground, with the promise from Arakan that there won't be any hindrance to their workers or to their work. So construction will not be stopped. So I think that was their other victory. But even with these assurances, long-term things will always be different. If you don't have political stability, anything can change at any time. And it's not just Arakan that you need to go through. You need to go through many, many regions.
Yeah.
So we have to look at it's
Very,
literally going like this.
yeah,
It's going like
very
this.
complex country.
It's across the country. So you have to cross many, many regions, many, many militia groups. You can't just negotiate with one group and say, "Acha, you know, nahi."
Balle balle. Hmm.
Yeah. So that's why that was the point of my article. Is that that's why I think that it's overestimating their ability and giving them way too much credit than need be. And it's a binary that you're looking at, not the whole picture. It's the piecemeal you're looking at, not the whole picture.
Thank you, G. It's always a very very bright and informative session with you. Thank you so much. Always appreciate you giving your insights and hope to see you back very soon. So keep writing and keep educating all of us. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Aadi. Thank you for having me. And I always enjoy being here. It's like it helps me rework my thoughts also. So thank you very much.
Thank you.